The station hung in the orbit of the shattered red moon like a spider web spun of steel and secrets, and within its silence stretched longer than solar tides, as the human named Kier moved through the halls that pulsed with pale green light the same way. Veins pulse with blood that has cooled too long. His boots made no sound and his eyes made no connection, and the beings who once watched him with curiosity now only glanced when necessary, for they had learned that this human did not bend like others. He absorbed, he listened, he watched, and said nothing, not when insulted, not when lied to, not when forced to labor past exhaustion. Because Kier was not like the humans they were used to. This one had come from a broken world, and he carried that brokenness like armor, not shame. He was assigned to repair the lower ring reactors, but he was also tasked unofficially with being the amusement of those who found him curious or inferior, or both. They poked, they pried, they laughed in their strange guttural tones, while he worked and never fought back, and still they poked, they tested, they wondered how far before a human reached his limit, and every day the limit stretched a little thinner until even the walls seemed to hum with the pressure of it, waiting for something they could not name. On the 15th cycle of the Crimson Moon, Kier was called to the Arboretum, where the alien girl waited, not the one who laughed nor the one who jeered, but the quiet one with eyes that changed hue with her breath and voice like glass wind. Her name was Azza, and she had spoken to him once, just once, and asked if Earth really had oceans that breathed, and he had said yes and nothing more. And now she stood beside a crystalline pod filled with sick flora and pointed not at the machine, but at him, and she asked him again, not of Earth, but of himself, and when he did not answer she reached and touched his arm, and in that small gesture something cracked, something ancient and deep and unseen for so long. He did not flinch, but he looked at her, really looked, and saw that her hand trembled slightly, and her eyes flickered between caution and defiance, and behind them others watched, and when he did not respond they laughed again, not because it was funny, but because they needed him to be small, and he still refused to speak. And then one of them said a thing that crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, a thing about Earth, a thing about mothers, a thing about weak creatures who break easily, and that was when the silence broke, not with words, but with Kier's hand rising and catching the laughing one by the collar and lifting, and for the first time the station heard his voice, low and dry like rust grinding against bone, and he said no more, and threw the alien into the roots of the sick tree and turned and walked, and no one followed. The fire began in the lower quarters, where power conduits tangled like metal snakes, and Kier moved through them with the precision of a builder, not a destroyer. But today he was both. Today he moved with purpose, and Azza followed him, not close, but close enough to see his hands not shaking, to see the wires stripped and rerouted, to see that this was not rage without thought, but judgment cold and final. He had spoken to no one, but she knew, and others began to feel it, the change in the air, the hum that no longer sounded like life support, but like warning. And when the lights dimmed and the gravity flickered, the laughter died, and when the reactors overloaded in sequence, not to explode but to fail and stall the engines, the station began to fall slowly, beautifully, helplessly into the orbit of the red moon, and she watched it from the upper dome, watched the world they built on silence, and cruelly fall toward a flame of their own making. And Kier stood beside her with his hands blackened and eyes unblinking, and finally he looked at her and said one thing, just one thing. He said this was never home, and then he walked away into the smoke that curled like silver ghosts. Azza survived, because Kier had made a path out for those who never laughed, those who never harmed, those who simply watched and wondered. And when the escape vessel launched, she did not cry, she did not call out, she only watched the station become a burning scar against the moon. And she whispered to herself, not in fear, but in awe, because she had seen a myth become a man, and a man become a storm, and a storm burn everything until only truth remained. She carried that in her voice, now in her eyes, in her steps, and when others asked what happened on the station, she told them it was justice, but not all believed her, not all understood, and that was fine, because she remembered not just the fire or the fall, but the moment before it, when a hand reached out, not in anger, but in refusal, in final unyielding refusal, to be mocked, to be broken, to be anything less than whole, and that was, what stayed with her more than flame, more than ash, more than escape. The final straw was not the insult or the pain, but the idea that he could be less, and she would never forget how he proved them all wrong, without rage, without roar, just the cold burning certainty that he had had enough and nothing would ever be the same again. And years later, when the wine on her new world smelled like ozone and new things were growing and she taught the young how to read stars, she would sometimes look up and wonder if any trace of him had made it past the fire, and if not, she hoped that what remained in her was enough to carry him just a little further into a better future, one no longer built on silence,